The following segment is brought to you in partnership with Future 42. Turn your frustration into action by signing up at future42.org. One of the biggest challenges when it comes to our state's public safety crisis is what to do with violent individuals who are mentally ill. There is this really vicious cycle that has played out many times where you have someone who commits a violent crime, is deemed incompetent to stand trial, but then they don't meet the threshold for an involuntary long-term civil commitment. So in some cases, they're just let back out on the streets to reoffend. Now there's a young woman who is speaking out and sharing her story. She survived an attempted rape in her Seattle apartment, only to find out that the man who attacked her, a man named Creek Singletary, may not serve a single day in prison. She and I chatted about the case, and I will note that we did agree to hide her identity. Well, first, thank you for doing this. I can't even imagine, but I'm sure it's not easy to continue to talk about. Let me just start by asking how you are. I mean, how you've been since this happened, and kind of the impact on your life.
Yeah, it's been a pretty scary 2022 so far. Over the summer, I thought I was doing better. I had gotten at least better about being really worried to walk on the street, going inside and out of buildings, things like that. And now just knowing that the fact he could be released as a possibility is bringing back a lot of that just hypervigilance and kind of always having my guard up.
Have there been any resources that you've been offered by the city or the county to sort of help you through this that you've been able to accept?
I had a legal advocate assigned to me, and I'm really grateful she's been with me on this process. I just know that the system is already really hard for rape or attempted rape survivors, and I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to make sure that justice takes place.
Weird question, but is this the first time that you have been the victim of a crime?
Yes.
It is. And
And I'm from the Puget Sound area. I grew up here. I've lived in Seattle for 7 years and really considered it home. Never felt scared on the streets. I love it here. And that morning, I could not believe it was real life. It felt like a movie or a bad dream. And I just want to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else.
before we started, you let me know, and it's totally understandable that you don't want to relive every moment of that day. To the extent that you're willing, you know, tell people or try to characterize to people what you went through, because when we get to the point where we talk about the suspect and what may or may not happen to them, I want people to try to understand what you went through.
So over the winter holidays, I was walking home from the grocery store and from a Starbucks run on my neighborhood's busiest street back home. And when I got back to my house, um, a man had followed me up the entryway from the street and was telling me this story about how he was a potential renter and he needed me to put my landlord's phone number into his phone. And I was pretty sure there are no vacancies, so I just tried to blow him off and I went inside. And in a split second, the door flew open behind me and I turned around. He was rushing inside and I knew something was really wrong. And we struggled. He was trying to muffle my screams and he pulled out a knife and told me to be quiet and to go upstairs. He forced me to my bedroom, pulled off some of my clothes, and and tried to rape me. I kept offering anything I could think of to make it stop, offering money, offering he could take anything in the house that he wanted. He turned it down. He offered to pay me. And he showed me a condom he had with him. And I really think the only reason I'm here today, or that something worse didn't happen, is because he didn't realize I'd had Bluetooth headphones in and I'd been on the phone with my dad, who obviously heard me scream when this person entered my house and called 911. And eventually the man started hearing the voice come from my pocket where the phone was. And it is a miracle that right as he hung up the phone call, the police started banging on my front door. He jumped up and fled. I kind of pulled my clothes back together, and he had locked the front door behind him, so I opened it to talk to the police and tell him he was running out the back door going around. And they caught him. And I found out later from the news that they also found black bondage tape and lubrication on him.
And so it's good.
And
Oh, go ahead.
and I, went to the hospital and got a rape kit right away. I was bleeding. I had kind of abrasions around my mouth from the gloves that he wore. And I remember talking to my friends kind of in those next few just kind of nightmarish days afterward, and saying, if this had to happen, or if this, if I have to go through this, at least it is so clear what happened, that they caught him, and then after this I can be safe. I don't have to worry about it. And now it feels like that might not be true anymore.
So in your mind, police showed up, they caught him, basically right there after he fled. So in your mind, there was really no question that, well, of course, this man's going to go to prison.
There was no question. The furniture in my house was messed up. The coffee I was holding had splashed across the entire first floor. We were finding stains on furniture, 20 feet away. He had a knife. He had seemed very, calculated and deliberate when I talked to him. He locked the front door behind him. He asked me if anyone else was coming to the house. And I really thought it was going to be an open and shut case.
So when did you start to realize that there were going to be questions about his mental state that might change the outcome of this case?
So in early February, I got a call from my advocate saying that the attacker was being recommended for mental competency, like restoration or treatment, at Western State Hospital, which is a state-run psychiatric hospital. And my first question was, is he going to try to plead, not guilty due to insanity or something like that? And she said, no, we see this in a lot of cases. People kind of deteriorate mentally once they're, being held. And so, we need to make sure that for a fair trial, he can participate in his own defense with his public defender. And I thought, okay, it's kind of a delay. I wish we could just get this over with. but they will do the restoration and we'll move forward. And I found out about 2 weeks ago from the prosecutor's office that an evaluator uh, found him mentally incompetent, not capable of standing trial, and that the charges would likely have to be dismissed.
And did they did they give you information as to what would happen to him if that were the case?
So, if someone is found too mentally incompetent to stand trial, but still has, some psychiatric conditions, especially ones that might make them a danger to the public, they're considered for civil commitment. So every 6 months or so, there can be a hearing to decide whether they need to continue being held at whatever facility they're at. And what worries me is we already know there's a backlog for Western State Hospital waiting for people to be admitted. My attacker had to wait from, I think, February to June to even be admitted. And I'm just worried that if there's too much demand and too little supply, that they won't be able to hold him. And there are previous cases across the US that we've seen where charges are dropped due to mental incompetency. Overcrowded psychiatric facilities, at some point let them go, and they almost immediately reoffend if they have a history of violent attacks already.
When the attack happened, and you think back to you mentioned he seemed very calculated. He locked the door behind him. Did you have any glimpse of someone who was mentally ill?
It never crossed my mind that this was not planned and premeditated. When I was talking to my landlord getting out of my lease, I told her it wasn't just, the memories of that place that I couldn't live with, but the idea that I didn't know if this person had been watching me. I didn't know if they knew where I ran or where I got my groceries. And, when I asked my advocate, do you think this might be an attempt to plead not guilty by insanity? I asked that because I was so scared that might happen when I truly feel in my bones that was not my experience. And what I think is extra frustrating for me, at least, is unlike many, many other people, I even have a witness account, right? My dad was on the phone, could hear me talking to this person. And the decision just doesn't seem to match up with the facts that I experienced, that this other person heard. And it just really scares me because if kind of these black and white facts of my case aren't enough, it makes me really worried for other women out there. What if this happens again? What if something happens and there's not a witness that time? It just feels like a slippery slope.
And I do know, a long time ago when I started in Seattle, I was covering crime and justice, and there seemed to be a lot of instances of people who were, deemed incompetent to stand trial, but too competent to be civilly committed. And there was like this group of people who fell through the cracks and just wound up back on the streets. What would your message be to elected leaders, to prosecutors about what you would like to see change or what you would like to see fixed?
I think it's just like you said, we need to fix those cracks. If one agency or branch of government, needs to hand off the process to another, then we need to make sure there's no gaps there, right? That there aren't these exceptions to the rule, which unfortunately, to your point, there seem to be a lot of that, you know, lead to these vicious cycles continuing.
And for you personally, without obviously giving too much detail, you already said that you don't live in that apartment anymore. You said earlier that you love Seattle. You consider Seattle home. Are you still living in Seattle?
I am. I I don't know what to do if he gets out. He could come back. He knows what I look like. Like I said, I don't know if he had been watching me. I I kind of made peace with the fact that like I would never know and that would be okay because he would be in prison for what he did. And now I wonder if I can stay or if I should stay or if that puts me at risk of this happening again, and maybe I wouldn't be lucky enough to have someone on the phone or to live as close to a police station, or I wouldn't have time to scream. It just scares me that there could be a next time and that next time could be worse.
To close with, and I think you alluded to this at the beginning, but and I to the extent that I can understand why, but you're obviously this still impacts your life and your mental well-being in a very profound way. I think that's very obvious and understandable. So why are you willing to talk about it? Why are you willing to do this interview? Why have you been willing to talk to others about this horrible thing that you went through?
I really don't want to, but I think sometimes bringing light to a situation is the only way to get it fixed. And like I said, I feel like if this is happening to me with so much evidence, with the attacker being caught running from the scene of the crime, I have a flexible job that was very understanding when I needed to take mental health leave, or an amazing support system. And if I can't get justice, it makes me scared for everyone else's case out there. And I really hope that speaking up can make a difference, not just for me, but hopefully bigger than me.
Well, I know there's scheduled to be a court hearing on Thursday. I don't know if that's going to be continued again, but we'll certainly be thinking about you throughout the week and following up with the prosecutor's office to see what happens here. But I really do appreciate your willingness to take the time to talk to us.
Thank you. I really appreciate you showing light on this issue too.
Now, I have been in contact with the King County Prosecutor's Office about this case, and they say they have multiple senior deputy prosecutors working on it, that they have asked for a little more time to figure out if there's anything they can do to push back against the finding that Mr. Singletary is incompetent to stand trial. If that's not successful, then essentially he'd be transferred to Western State for a 72-hour hold, and then Western State would decide whether he meets the criteria for a long-term civil commitment. If he doesn't, then it is possible that he winds up just back out on the streets, which is, of course, what the survivor in this case fears the most. I will say that this has been a problem in Washington State for a long time, and it's a problem that lawmakers in Olympia are keenly aware of. One, that our mental health system is absolutely in shambles. I mean, under Governor Jay Inslee's leadership, Western State lost its national accreditation. And so certainly the mental health system has been a mess for years. But also the fact that, you have politicians who say that they care about survivors and they want justice for survivors, but they have yet to find a meaningful solution as to what they can do to close this gap, to keep violent offenders from falling through the gap in this way. So coming up next week on Undivided, we're going to speak to some lawmakers and ask them about what kind of action they're willing to take and what kind of action they can take to try to make a difference in cases like these. The previous segment was brought to you in partnership with Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org.